Oh boy. Hello, hello. Let's see if I can figure all this out. Make sure we've got chat. Okay. So, hello, hello. I think I see viewers. It's almost 11 o'clock. Wow, this is totally different. I'm used to doing live stuff on Periscope, and YouTube is a very different setup. So feel free over on the right to ask your questions in the chat. And hopefully this is working properly. I see 3 viewers. Hopefully there will be more people. Thank you for joining me. I'm Kathleen Dames. I'm a knitwear designer here in New York City, and this is my first live chat. This is season 2 of the Sweater with Kathleen Dames, episode 5, the live show. And today I thought I would take some time to answer any questions that you might have about knitting sweaters, especially the Purly Pullover, as modeled by my lovely co-host, Lady Jane. If you are a regular watcher of the sweater, you know Jane already, and you probably recognize the sweater I'm wearing too. This is the Solstice Cardi, the cardi that I knit for season 1 of the sweater, which we did from January through March. Right now, we're almost halfway through season 2 of the sweater, and we're knitting the Purly Pullover. And if you haven't signed up for the Purly Pullover, you can do so anytime. Visit kathleendames.com/thesweater. And when you sign up for the newsletter, you will get a link to download your very own copy of the Purly Pullover. If you're not a joiner, that's fine. Go to Ravelry and search for Purly Pullover, and you can purchase the pattern there anytime. But subscribers will receive a coupon for a substantial discount purchasing the pattern for their Ravelry library at the end of the season, which will be in July. So let's see. To list all available comments, enter /?. Just make sure. Okay. I'm hoping this is all working. So thank you guys for being here. I have a list of questions that, well, you can't really see that. Wow, it's really, it's kind of blinding. But I thought I would start with some questions. I'm going to put them over here so I can see them without having to look down. And I will answer those. And then if you have questions, please put them in the chat over there, and I will get to them as we go along. So let's see. Let's start with Sally's question. Sally was wondering what I thought of using an alpaca yarn for the sweater. And a lot of you probably already have your yarn chosen, but if you don't and you're considering an alpaca, alpaca is a lovely fiber. It's very warm. The thing to know about alpaca is that unlike wool, it's very long and smooth and straight. So wool is all crinkly and sort of holds itself together, holds itself up. Alpaca, it gets that lovely sheen from those smooth fibers. It has a lot of drape. It doesn't have a lot of memory. So just be aware of that. I wouldn't knit it at a loose gauge, and I wouldn't knit it particularly larger than you are, because it's going to sort of stretch and drape. So that's something to keep in mind about alpaca. I think it would be great for this sweater because this is a sort of comfy, drapey kind of sweater. It's a fancy sweatshirt, right? So if you have some alpaca that you've fallen in love with, there's no reason not to use it. Just make sure that you keep your gauge on the tighter side, you know, so the smaller stitches hold them together better. And if it can be an alpaca blend with some wool, that will help too. The wool has that memory that will keep your stitches in shape and not let them stretch out so much over time. So that's my thought on alpaca. My next question is from Michelle, and she said, I'm a 36. What size do you think I should knit? Do you think I should knit the 40? And I think yes. While I recommend about 2 inches of ease when you're starting to figure out this sweater, I think 0 ease. I don't think. unless you're sort of changing the look and the feel of the sweater and you want it to be fitted, I definitely feel like a little larger. And you could be brave and make a slight adjustment to the stitch counts just on your own. So if you know that you're 36 and you want a 38, and you know that, what's our gauge? Let's see, get out the pattern here. And let's say you're doing this, let's do the DK for ease. And there are 20 stitches to 4 inches. So you could subtract, or you could add 10 stitches to the stitch counts for the 36-inch size, or subtract 10 stitches from the stitch count for the body of the 40-inch size and get exactly the size you want. So that's certainly an option for you. And okay, sorry, just checking something. And I wouldn't worry too much about adjusting the sleeve size at that point, because the stitch count numbers for the sleeves are much smaller than the range of stitch counts for the body. So, and then you'll just split, so you'll have 5, more stitches than the 36 on the front and 5 more on the back. And that's, but that way you can make it exactly the size you want it to be, because you are the boss of your knitting, right? Or if you don't think you are, you are. You should be. You're the boss of your knitting. And just a little bit, I know a lot of us, I even think of myself as intimidated by math, but just adding or subtracting a few stitches is not a huge deal, but it's going to give you a sweater that fits exactly the way you want it to fit. So, Sally, I would definitely go with the size 40 on that, as opposed to the 36, but keep in mind that you could make some slight adjustments, and mostly to the body, and get a sweater that is 38 inches. You can do it. And it's especially on a sweater like this where there's no waist shaping, you're just knitting that tube. You can make it a 38-inch tube instead of a 36 or a 34. So thank you, new viewers. As you're coming in, feel free to say hi, introduce yourself in the chat bar on the right. Could somebody say hi? I'm just worried I'm not seeing the chat. I see that there are viewers, but I'm not seeing any chatting. What do you think? Are you all saying hello and I'm not seeing it? Shoot. Let's make sure I've got these. No, I want the chat window. I've got the chat window. I don't want to do any screen sharing. I'm just looking at the tools on the side because this is my first time doing this. So thank you for being here. I so appreciate you joining me for our little adventure. Cameraman, I think we're good on the camera, huh? Oh boy. Okay. That's never mind. Okay. Let's get back. If you, I just am worried that you guys are asking me all sorts of questions and I'm not seeing it. What happens if we do this? Are we there? Oh, okay. There's the chat window. Okay. I'm going to have to check it every once in a while. Thank you so much, you guys, for being here. Okay, it looks like the camera's good. All right. The chat is not showing up in my window when I'm talking to you. So every once in a while, I'm going to toggle back and forth. So let me go on to the next question that we've got. So Nani asked, hold on. I got it. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I was playing it in. We'll get better at this, okay? So next question. Nani asked, how does the Purly Pullover gauge compare to Solstice Cardi? She had knit the Solstice Cardi along with us for season 1 and was a little confused about the yarn and the needle suggestions that I made in the pattern for the Purly Pullover. And they are different. It's a different gauge. It's a different kind of fabric. I am a loose knitter, and so that's something else to keep in mind. So I end up having to go down a needle size sometimes from sort of standard gauge and, or, standard needle for that gauge. So keep that in mind. If you know that you're a really tight knitter and you are looking at that pile of pashmina and the size 3 needle and saying, there is no way then you know that you need to go up a size needle automatically. So that's just something to bear in mind. Also to know that the standard for pattern writing is I write the pattern that will give you this thing. And I write the pattern telling you how I got the thing. So I will give you my needle and my gauge and my yarn. You probably aren't going to use the exact same yarn. You probably don't knit exactly the same way I do. So that means that everything will just be a little, you know, you're the boss of your knitting. So, so that's what I have to say about that. And just, yes, I'm wearing the Purly Pullover. No, I'm wearing the Solstice Cardi. Jane's wearing the Purly Pullover. They are, the funny thing is, this is knit in a, so this is sport weight. It's heavier than the fingering weight of this sweater. And this fingering weight sweater is knit in a slightly more open gauge because it's meant to be stretchy. And that's what I wanted for this one. And for this one, I wanted a slightly more cohesive fabric. And that's what I felt worked best with the pashmina, which is a sport weight yarn. Okay, I'm going to flip over and see if there are any questions. So the camera's good, and I got some more comments below. No, okay. Okay, so now I will go on to, okay. How about, we'll do Cece's question. She had a great question. She asked what I thought about short or 3/4 length sleeves. And because she didn't want long sleeves. And this, as the pattern is written, as I wrote it and as I knit it, the sleeves are pretty long. I have long arms and I knit them, I wrote the pattern for them to be long. If you want to do short sleeves, that's kind of the easiest thing. Because for that, I would just say cast on the number of stitches that I have you work to. So, you know, I have you increase stitches up to, I'm looking at the DK weight version. So for the smallest size, 48 stitches for your, that's your sort of top of sleeve is what we call it. And I would just cast on those 48 and do your ribbing and you know, expect that it's going to be here. You could make it as long as you want, but if you cast on the top of the sleeve stitches, then you're good to go for the rest of it. For 3/4 sleeves, which can also be really nice, for that, I'm going to ask you to do a little math, but you can do it, I promise. What you're going to do is you're going to add your cast on number to your top of sleeve number, and you're going to divide that by 2, and that's your average. And so that should get you, you know, sort of midway up your arm. Cast on that number of stitches. If it's not a multiple of 6, what I have you do is do the multiples of 6 for the ribbing and then just knit the last few stitches. So it would either be, you know, 2 or 4 stitches, and those, and just have those be here at the join, and they'll just, you're only doing the ribbing for a little while. You have a few extra stitches that will be purl side when you are actually wearing it, but nobody's going to notice. In fact, I think for this one, that's what I have. You can see this is slightly wider right here than this. So that just means I had a few more stitches here. But it's no big deal. It's at your wrist or it's here, and nobody's going to be like counting stitches. If they are, I hope they are very good friends, because if they're judging you, ignore them. So cast on that number of stitches, do the ribbing that way, and then just proceed and increase only up to the top of sleeve number. So you won't do as many increases. And so I think that's, you know, I think short sleeves would be really cute. I think 3/4 sleeves would be a great sort of casual way to wear it. Whatever works for you. Again, you're the boss of your knitting. So I appreciate your question, Cece. Thank you. And let's see. Okay, choosing your fabric is good. Thanks, Linda. Yes, yeah, you are, and again, it all comes back to being the boss of your knitting, right? So, okay, next question, let's see. I think Victoria's is a great question. How can I modify the neckline to cover the shoulders more? Question, as you've seen in, you know, the photos, I'm wearing it with a with a t-shirt underneath. I often wear it with a tank top or a camisole and just sort of roll with it. But it's a really wide neckline. So for that, I think your best thing to do is to just do a few more. Actually, first of all, you can figure out exactly where you want it to be. I don't have my tape measure with me right now, but take your tape measure, like a loose, a soft tape measure, drape it around you, kind of where you want it to be. Measurement. Then figure out your number of stitches for that. So if you're doing DK, your gauge is 20 stitches over 4 inches. That's 5 stitches to the inch. So you just multiply your measurement, your own measurement, by 5, and that's your target number of stitches. So you're just going to decrease and do a few more decreases, probably not too many more, of the raglans, and that'll bring the fabric up. It'll give you a little more fabric. It'll bring you in a little closer. And then if it's not a multiple of 6, make a little adjustment to make it a multiple of 6 so that you can do that top ribbing so that everything matches your collar to your cuff to your hem. So that's a really pretty easy way to do it. And we are decreasing 8 stitches every other round for the raglan. So I have a few more inches. I mean, if you do 3 more decreased raglan rounds, you will have eliminated 24 stitches. That's 5 inches. So you can definitely go higher if you feel more comfortable that way. I think that was all I needed to say about that. So that's a great question from Victoria about modifying the neckline. I had talked a long time ago about possibly doing a different version of the neckline, but I ended up doing 2 weights for the sweater. So the sweater pattern is written for DK or sport weight. So I didn't have room to do modifications for the neckline. But you could also do that. You want it lower down here and higher in the back. You would just hold some stitches here, or just work back and forth, sort of desk, and continue to do the decreases and leave the front here. I just wanted this to be a really comfortable knit as well, to have a no back. That's something you can definitely do. I'm going to check the chat window again. You lost sound. Uh-oh. Do we have sound back? So Nicole's saying refresh. Adding stitches for the sleeves. Okay, so Nicole asks about adding stitches for the sleeve. And I don't know if that was for this part or just in general. If you have wider arms, this is written for sort of narrow, it's kind of a narrow sleeve. So it wouldn't be hard to just follow the numbers for the next size up. The body, you can sort of franken knit it, have your sleeves be a little wider, and bear in mind that, of course, the sleeves just overall, no matter what, there are many fewer stitches, so it's not going to make as much of a difference here when you're decreasing. So if you just keep in mind, you can either do an initial couple of decreases just on the sleeve side, and so then you get to the numbers for your size for the whole raglan decrease yoke, or you can just go for it and do the 8 stitch decreases every other round for the raglan. Sorry, Jane probably made some weird squeaky noises there. And just, you won't have the exact same numbers as I would have if you start with bigger sleeves and you don't make an adjustment, but that's okay. Just make sure that when you're ready to do the ribbing that you have a multiple of 6 and you're good to go. I mean, knitting isn't rocket science. It's very flexible. And so we have room, we have wiggle room there. So I'm hoping, I'm going to check the chat again. Is anybody, let's see if I'm going to type. Can you hear me? I think you can now. Okay, 9-inch circ. Okay. Oh, Lisa. Okay, so yeah, Lisa, I have you. I was going to talk about what you asked. Wait, did I? Sorry. So Lisa has a 9-inch circular. She's going to do smaller cuff size and increase after that. I have small wrists and bigger arms. That's okay. So Lisa, I think that's great. We were talking, and I have a couple questions about magic loop that I'm going to get to. But Lisa asked me the other day about doing magic loop, and there was a little bit of confusion about those extra stitches for some of the sizes. Inch circ is great if that works for you. For doing the cuff. And then, so if you have narrow wrists and you have bigger arms, you can increase more. The only thing to keep in mind about increasing to a bigger size, which I totally endorse, increases happen in the pattern, and make sure that you're going to have room to do those increases and still get to your top of sleeve number before it's time to separate and then join. So you may want to do your increases a little closer together. So let's say I have you, so for some sizes, you do it every 8th round. And if you are going to do more increases for your sleeve, it would be best to then shift to the doing it every 6th round, just to make sure that you're going to be able to get to that bigger size quickly enough. That doesn't make sense. You know, before you need to stop and join. I'm sorry. Those of you who know me on Periscope know that this is the time of day where the street cleaner goes by a few days a week. And it's now stopped right at our corner. So it's very loud here, at least for me. Hopefully you're not hearing all of it. I think it's almost done. Okay. So, yeah, so just make sure, you know, double check that you're going to be able to do those increases. If you're going to be adding another inch worth of stitches, that's probably, you know, 3 more increase rounds. So you just want to make sure that you get enough, that you have enough room to do all the increases you want to do and not end up with sleeves that are, you know, for a giant. Okay. All right, Nicole's back. Yes, good. Okay, all is well. Thanks, Varian. Okay, so let's see. Next question. So Stephanie asked me this morning how to avoid ladders with magic loop. And I cast on some stitches here. And so the way I do magic loop, I'm just going to pull out my, you can do it with a shorter needle, but you know, a lot of people recommend something like a 40-inch or longer. And that certainly makes it a little easier just because you have so much more. And a more flexible cable can help. I'm doing this again. I did this, you guys might have seen it in an episode where I had things backwards. I always do that. No, I had them the right way this time. Okay, so I have pulled out my, for me, you don't have to pull out the tails at the same point every round. I think that's something that some people don't realize. They feel that they have to do it the way that they would do DPNs, that, you know, you have a certain number of stitches on the DPNs and that's just the way it is. But you don't have to do that. You can pull it out, and sometimes if I have a lot of stitches but not enough to fill the whole circumference, I will end up just pulling out a tail on one side and sort of to sort of take out that slack to make it easier. But the thing about magic loop is that you can change where you pull out the stitches. And all right, I'm getting started here. And sorry, do it like this. It's hard to knit holding it right up in front of your eyes, but let me get to the end of this here so I can just sort of explain. So now I've got this, my working needle. I always push the working needle through first. So there's always, wherever you separated it, for this side, it's going to kind of stay like that. But I don't have to, so this is the join. I don't have to slide, it's not a rule that I have to separate it at the same spot. If I shift that to a different spot, I sort of open those stitches up a little, and you end up with less of a ladder. The good thing is that blocking can sort of help relax all your stitches, and and make things more cohesive, but it cannot fix a really extreme ladder. So that's why even if you're doing it with DPNs, I recommend, I often will knit a couple extra stitches onto and those switching spots around the whole circumference. And that makes it, it just makes it a little more cohesive. If it's really bad, I suppose you could go at the ladders with a, like a crochet hook. That's a lot of tedious work to sort of nudge the stitches on either side to make them a little bigger and close up that ladder. So I prefer sort of shifting the spots where you're changing. Have a, you only need to know where your join, where your beginning of round is. You can use a stitch marker. I find because I'm switching skeins, I just go to the point where it's time to switch skeins, and my fingers notice that enough that I know where I don't need another marker. But you can use a marker. There's nothing wrong with it. Use as many markers as you need. Use the tools available to you. Don't feel like, oh, I want to be a better knitter, so I forget that. You are the boss of your knitting. So, so that's my advice on magic loop, is to not always pull the loops out at the same part. And then to, I have done magic loop with thick cables. It is easier the thinner the cable, the more flexible the cable, but you can do it. Another thing also is to consider sort of tugging just a little tighter on that, not just the first stitch after a split, after the, after you change needles, but the second stitch, and that sort of snugs those stitches up. So gently snug. Snug those stitches together. So that's my magic loop answer. But really, I think the best thing to do is to not pull out when you get to the end of a needle and you're pulling out a loop, to not pull it out in the exact same spot every time, because that does tend to create a ladder, and that's not what you want. So shift where you're pulling it out, and you will only have little sort of blorps. And when you block your sweater, and it has a bath and it relaxes, and stitches, I read somewhere one time that yarn wants to achieve an equilibrium. So, and that's one of the reasons that sweaters in museums tend to look so perfect, is everything is sort of relaxed and settled. So don't get too freaked out about your, if not all of your stitches are even. However, at the same time, you cannot say, oh, blocking will fix everything. Right? Let's do it right the first time. And for that, I think shifting stitches around if you're using DPNs every few rounds, and changing where you pull out your tails or ears or whatever you call them. I think of them as ears for magic loop, will help sort of shift those gaps over the whole thing rather than having them be in ladders. Okay, so let's go back and check. You're going to start, Lisa says she's going to start increasing right after the cuff. Yes, so do that, and then you may also want to, just to be safe, do it every 6th round, or, if you know your gauge and you know your row gauge, you can know exactly how often, and it doesn't have to be on even rounds. That's one of the great things about circular knitting. You can do your increases every 3rd round, every 5th round. It doesn't have to be, like when you're knitting flat, back and forth, most people prefer to do their increases on the right side, on the knit side of the fabric. That's just, we're more comfortable with that. But when you're working in the round, you can do whatever you want. so that's very convenient. So, but if you know your row gauge and you know how long you want your sleeve to be, you can figure out exactly how far apart. And you could also be like, you know what? My arms get to their widest point just above the elbow. So I want to do my increases between, 2 inches above the elbow and just above the cuff. And then it's not a hard math thing. We'll say that's 12 inches, and you need to do, let's see, 28, and you need to do 20 increases. So, and you're getting, and so that's 12 inches. Let's say, what did we say the gauge was? 28 rows. Oh, wow, I just lost my I just lost my train of thought on how to do that. But so 12 inches, that's 7 rows per inch. That's 84 rows, and you want to increase 20 times. So 84 divided by 20, you could do it every fourth. Is that right? Every fourth round. That way you'd be sure that you have all your increases done. And then you just do the rest, you know, to length and knit even on those stitches. So I'm gonna go back to the chat and check. Linda says my 9-inch stitches for sleeves is finer than double points. Okay, and not too loud. I think she means with the audio. Is finer. So you know, whatever you're comfortable with. If you use a 9-inch, that's great. I think Jolie Kelly did some tests and she tried out a bunch of different 9-inch circulars a while ago. So you may want to go back and look. I think that's on her YouTube channel. And Joeli Kelly is another talented knitter, designer, and person who is helping knitters around the world. Okay, so let's see. We figured out how to avoid ladders and magic loop, hopefully. And Stephanie did also say, I'm not sure if my cable isn't long or flexible enough. If you have a 24-inch cable, you can do magic loop. It's a little, you can still do it. And like I said, sometimes if I am working on, say, a sample for a magazine and they want the sweater to be 28-inch bust. Oh, so tiny. But most of my needles, I have a bunch of 40-inch needles. That's just what works for me most of the time. But I'll pull out just one little loop right at the end of my right-hand needle and just leave that to work its way around. And so that you don't have to do 2 big ears and then you're trying to work on these tiny stitches crammed in there because you've got a 24-inch needle. That's okay. So try that, just the one loop, or just shift the stitches around and have your right needle. Here, I'm gonna show you if I can. I can't really, but pretend this isn't here. Pretend I have more stitches here. And so I would just pull this free and start working them onto the needle like this. Okay, it would be a much smaller. We'll pretend I have a lot of stitches here. How's that? And so we just have this one tail or one ear. So that could work too. Okay, so we figured out about magic loop. Arlie asks, what's the best way to join in a new skein? And how do you deal with knots in a skein? So what I like to do when I'm joining in a new skein is to work until I have about 6 inches of the old skein left, not a whole lot more. And then, oops, pulled out a stitch there. Okay, what I would do is then, here, I'll show you. We're making this up. I would leave about a 6-inch of the new yarn as the tail. And I would wrap the old and the new together. I'm trying to figure out how best to show you guys. No, that's not going to show it. Together. See, I have my old and my new here, and I make a stitch, and I'll do 1 or 2 stitches with both tails, and then I will drop the old tail and continue working with the new yarn. And knitting those 1 or 2 stitches together sort of anchors everything, so you're not worried about loose ends. And then I go back and sort of snug them up a little, and then at the end I will weave those stitches in, and I will when we show you how I like to weave in tails for something like this where you're going to be seeing the back of the work. But I can tell you now, what I like to do is kind of like duplicate stitch, and I do it from the back, from the purl side, and I just go, here, let's see if I can sort of explain it to you. I will just follow a row of stitches, and I'll go up and through the top and down but I'm not just going through one row of stitches. I'm following how the stitches are made and weaving that yarn in and out, and it becomes virtually invisible. And I like to do that before I block, and then blocking, you know, like I've said, it sort of makes everything relaxed and settle in together, and they're virtually invisible. I know that there's one woven in, I think it's on the back here right now. Yeah, I can see it. It's a little bit bumpier. You can kind of see it there. I think the light's catching it. It's harder to see when you're wearing it, but it just makes it a tiny bit thicker. But it's really invisible as opposed to, let's see. Nah, I can't show you on here. Okay, so let's see what's on the chat. Yeah, so Lisa, you saw someone using 9-inch circs on sleeves and she loved it. It could have been Jolie. Yeah, it's certainly, I know she tested out a bunch of different 9-inch circs, although she may have been doing socks, but I'm sure there are multiple people trying that out and finding what works for them. For other people who don't want to do a 9, sometimes the thing about the 9-inch needle is that the needle part, the straightaway part, this is shorter to so that it can make that loop. And for some people that doesn't work with the way they knit and how their hands, how they like to knit and hold things. So, you know, it's very personal. If a 9-inch isn't working for you for sleeves, you can do double pointed needles. I know a lot of people find DPNs kind of like wrestling with a hedgehog to begin, but if you can persevere, like it gets easier as you have some more fabric hanging from those needles. There's also, we've talked a lot about the magic loop, and that's an easy option. I like it because it means I use the same needle for the entire sweater. And, you know, especially when I'm producing samples that will be in a magazine or that I'm publishing, I want them to be perfect as they can be. I mean, you know, perfection is the enemy of the good. But if I use the same needle for the whole thing, I know that if there are issues with gauge, that's really on me. And I you know, at least I'm not blaming my materials. So that's why I've been collecting more 40-inch and 60-inch needles for that purpose, and the longer cables for the interchangeable sets. The other option is, I have to say honestly, I don't know how to do it, but people do 2 circular needles, and half of the stitches are on one needle and half on the other, and somehow they can make it work. And I know there are descriptions out there, and so it's doing, you know, you can search for doing something on 2 circs, and somebody else will show you how to do that, because I know it can be done. I think Weekend Knitting by Melanie Fallick's book from a long time ago has a thing on it too, and I just never knit the things in that book that she recommended doing the 2 circs system. So I'm afraid I can't help anyone particularly with 2 circs, but I know it can be done. It's totally doable. I know a lot of people who have pairs of circular needles, like pairs of 24-inch circulars in the sizes that they do this in the most often. And of course, the last option, which is one I don't recommend, but if you're desperate or if you only have straight needles, is to work it back and forth and seam it up at the end. Then you have to do seaming. And while I don't mind doing seaming, and I've got, you know, like this has a seam, right? See, there it is. Oh, look how nice. I prefer taking advantage of knitted fabrics flexibility and working tube-wise when I can. Except for this, I wanted the sleeves to match the body. So in addition to using the same needle, I use the same technique of working back and forth. Yeah. Oh, okay, so let's see. Lisa says, on Quince & Company yarn, I have to hand wash so it doesn't felt correct. I believe so. It depends, Lisa, on your yarn, but definitely follow the ball band. And if you're washing your swatch, treat it the way you would treat your sweater. Now, these days there are a lot of machines, washing machines, that have hand wash settings, special things, and that's lovely. And when I am washing a bunch of sweaters, I do put mine in the machine. I don't really let the cycles run. I have a top loader, so it's easier to do that. And So I'll fill it up with water and soak whatever wool wash you're using. I've even been known to use shampoo on occasion. But I usually just use the washing machine to be a tub and to squeeze things out too. So I'll let it sit. I might let it agitate for like 30 seconds just to stir up the soap and sort of that kind of stuff. And then let the machine spin out the water, do a rinse, let it fill up, but not let it agitate, just to be safe. So yeah, and to remember that if you're worried about felting, the things it's a combination of factors. It's usually it's wool, it's changes in temperature, hot, cold, cold, hot, agitation, and the soap. The soap changes, I believe, changes the pH, and that aids in felting. So you can use hot water, but do not agitate. You can, use cold water and agitate a little, but remember that those are the factors that go into felting. So to avoid felting, don't put all those together. I like sort of gentle warm water and just a little swishing, to work the soap through or whatever, and gentle, and try and maintain a constant temperature. So that's how I'd avoid felting. And okay, so Varian has asked if I talk more about changing skeins of hand-dyed yarn and pulling yarn up the side. Absolutely. You use true circs all the time. Okay, so Varian is our expert for true circular needles. So that's good to know. I don't know why I've never figured that out. I just haven't. So up until now, I've talked about this on the podcast, I think, but I had always twisted the skeins around one another. And you can see that line. You can see that line here on this one. But as I was working on, I think, episode 3, pretty early on, I read something that said instead of twisting the skeins around each other as you come to the change of round, just let go of the yarn you've been knitting with and then pick up, without twisting, the new yarn, skein 2, and start knitting with that. And I did that. And I haven't blocked this yet because I'm lazy. But there's really once it's blocked, I don't think you'll be able to see it at all. Right here, you can kind of see there's a slight, the thing you have to kind of figure out as you're doing it is how much to pull on the new skein. When you're switching, the skein you're switching to. You want to pull it, but not too tight, because then you'll end up with a pucker, but not too loose or you'll kind of ladder. So finding that happy medium when you are switching skeins. And it's like, oh my God, why did I not do this before? And I think the thing is that when I learned about switching skeins, I was working on a striped pattern, the women's deckhand, which is worked in the round, but it's like a mariner sweater. And so it's got thin blue stripes and wider bands of white. And so I had to carry that blue yarn up the side so it would be ready for the next stripe. And to do that, you need to twist the yarns around one another as you're going up. So every time you come to them, sort of twist them together and then go on your merry way. And that makes sure there aren't any gaps. But that's when you're going over longer distances. I sort of took that and ran with it. And I don't mind this. I don't notice it. It's, do you spend a lot of time worrying about the side of your sweater? But I am happy now to have figured this out. So the other part of Varian's question was about working with hand-dyed yarn. And for that, I definitely recommend switching skeins, because then you'll be blending things together. And it works for, semi-solid, like this beautiful yarn from Reen at Happy Fuzzy Yarn. This is a semi-solid. You can sort of see it's not perfectly evenly pink. It's so pretty though. So it's got, and I love that. It's got, little bits of lighter color and little bits of darker pink. But even if you go to a more variegated kind of colorway, where you've got crazy yarn colors going on. A lot of times those skeins are dyed such that they either could be self-striping or they have consistent sort of chunks of color. And you want to, if you don't mix those together, you end up with flashing and pooling, which is chunks of a color. And what I like about this is also pashmina and dyed, as is this yarn from Karen at Camelot, the Camelot yarn. So that's the yarn base. Round table yarns. So when you do them every other round or every 2 rounds, you're sort of breaking up that color repeat, because otherwise they just stack up on top of each other. And this way, at least they sort of strike together, and that makes them blend more. I mean, you can kind of see, here's a slightly darker band, here's a slightly lighter band, here's another darker band, but they all kind of mesh together. So that's my, oh, hold on. I'm just gonna go back and, oh, there we go. It's going to check, okay. The other thing to keep in mind, if you're using something like a self-striping yarn for the sleeves and the body, is that the stripe happens at a different rate. So the way a stripe is made in hand-dyed yarn is a certain stretch, a specific length of yarn is dyed a certain color. And when you knit it at a certain gauge, you will get that many stitches, like, especially it's for socks. So let's say each inch of yarn makes 1 stitch. And so you'd have 60 inches in a 60-inch stretch in one color. And so if you get that gauge, then you will get that stripe. And if your gauge is different or you're casting on a different number of stitches, that will work out differently. The thing is, with the body and the sleeves, if you're using a self-striping yarn, you will get a different effect. The sleeves will stripe at a different rate from the body. So if it's 60 stitches and you're casting on, 200 stitches for the body, you'll have just stripes will be thinner on the body and thicker on the sleeves. I think that could be adorable. You'll just have to bear in mind that the yoke will look different from the sleeves and the body. So that's just something to keep in mind. You may like the effect, you may not like the effect, and you may need to experiment a little. Slight changes in gauge can change the sort of striping rate. So that's something to experiment with. I think it can be really cute. If you want stripes and you don't want to rely on a self-striping yarn, then that also, if you're doing thin stripes, you just change every round like you would with just alternating between the 2 skeins for your variegated. If you want thicker, then you do need to think about either you're going to break the yarn after every stripe of one of the colors, and then you have a lot of ends to weave in, or you're going to have to carry it up the side. And to be honest, I haven't done a lot of experimenting with carrying up the yarn on the right side, on the knitted side of the work, to avoid this little twisty thing. But I think that's what you would need to do, is carry it on the outside and twist it together somehow, but have that twist be on the knitted side of the fabric. And then when you turn it inside out to wear it, you won't see that change. Okay, so, oh, and how do I deal with knots in a skein? So especially for something that's worked completely in the round, you have to cut out the knots, I think. Otherwise you end up with knotted bits in your nice smooth fabric. So cut out the knots, break them apart, start a new ball, and start it again, like just knit a couple stitches together and then shift to the new yarn and weave them all in. And if you weave them in the way I'm going to show you, so it won't be a big deal. If you discover as you're winding up your yarn or whatever that you have a bunch of knots, separate out your balls, look at them, see if there's any, extreme color variation, and sort of try and figure out where you want to put those. If I had like a darker bit, I might want it to be up in the collar or just have it be at the cuffs. But just be aware, know your yarn before you get started. And then if I had if I ended up with a bunch of mini skeins, I probably would use them in the sleeve and have the longer ones in the body, just because if I'm knitting a big tube, I don't want to constantly be adding in new yarn. So that is my advice on starting new skeins, switching skeins, and using and dealing with knots in skeins. Also, if you find more than 2 knots consistently in your yarn, you should let the manufacturer know. You may want to let your local yarn store know, but they probably will recommend getting in touch with the manufacturer, or they may do it for you. But you know, sometimes quality control isn't as great as it should be. But if you're finding a lot of skeins with 4 knots in it and it wasn't like a mill end thing that you got for cheap, you should let them know, because they need to know. They want to put out a quality product, and you want to knit with a quality product. So, okay. Lisa says she was told that knots lessen the strength. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, yeah, it messes up the stitches, right? It certainly lessens the cohesiveness of the fabric when you've got a knot in there, and it can rub. I think it could just be uncomfortable, but I think it's also not good for your knitted fabric. So I definitely recommend removing the knot. I know it's not fun. I'm sorry, but you know, removing that knot and starting again with a new skein and leaving a tail and weaving it in. Some people will knit together 2 together for like an inch and then just snip off the tails at either end, and that's certainly an option. I like, if the yarn will do it, spit splicing, and then I don't have to worry about weaving in ends at all. So it depends on your yarn and how you feel about spit. But you know, if you sort of rough up the here, I'm going to explain it. This works especially well when you're doing a one color thing like this. I've seen lots of cool, complicated ways to join tails together when working Fair Isle, and Varian might be able to tell us more about that. But this thing is great. Oh, this works out perfectly, because you can see my tails are sort of fuzzy. So if you can kind of open up those tails a little. Some people will remove a couple of strands if this is a 4-ply. I don't do that. It will be a little bit thicker, but what you do, and some people use water. That's fine. I have heard there's something in spit that actually helps in the felting process. I don't know if that's true, but I'm not going to really spit because I don't feel like doing that right now, because I don't really want to felt these together. But overlap your skeins just a little. Can you see? I've got my, there we go. So what we're doing is we're felting them. I'm gonna spit in my hand, patooey, and then we are going to use heat and essentially agitation, and we're going to rub those together really fast, and your hands get a little hot. And I mean, they're sort of felted together a little just doing that without the spit. But getting it wet, again, we've got the water, we've got heat, you know, temperature change, and we've got agitation. And it's virtually, this is a little thick because obviously I didn't actually use any spit, but you know, that's not too bad. So I really do love spit splicing and foot yarn. So like Brooklyn Tweed, Shelter, and Loft, awesome for spit splicing. And Harrisville, their yarns are great. It's like those woolen spun yarns. They're sort of fuzzy and lofty and fluffy. They're perfect for spit splicing. The worsted spun, they're very smooth and elegant. It's kind of harder to get them to smash together, but it can be done. So that's how I recommend. That's the other way. If you have good spit splicing, if you have good feltable yarn, definitely do spit splicing, or you dip it in water, don't spit, but you know, desperate times call for spitting in your hand and rubbing your yarn together. Okay. One last question, unless somebody else has another question. But Liz asked, when you join in the round, do you slip the last stitch onto the left needle and the first stitch onto the right needle as for socks? And I have to say, I do not. I am not a sock knitter. I've written one sock pattern. I've knit a few pairs of socks, and I've never actually done that. I know that people do that to sort of cross it over and make it like a smoother join, I guess. I never do. So you can see, that means that, you know, I have this little jog here because this is the start, and we're making a spiral, of course, when we're working in the round. When I weave in these ends, I will sort of weave them in such a way that it makes it look a little more cohesive. But I don't do that. I don't do the swapping of stitches, and I just don't. If you do, cool. That might make it look nicer than mine. But I haven't tried that. If you have tried that and you have feelings about it, I would love to know. So so you can let me know. We have about 5 minutes left, so if anybody has any other questions, please ask them here. And I just wanted to say, if you are watching this after the live event and you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below the video. I check them every once in a while, and I'm happy to answer more questions. And if a lot more questions come up, so if there are any last questions in the chat, now would be the time to ask them. We are at 11:55. It has been fairly quiet here, which is good. I hope you've enjoyed our time together. And I think that's everything. The other place to ask questions is the Ravelry forums. So Kathleen Ames Design, my Ravelry forum, there's a thread for each episode of the podcast, and it's a great place to ask questions because other people have good answers too. So I like to sort of take advantage of that hive mind, and I check the forums 5 days a week, at least once a day. If people are asking a lot of questions, I will check more during the day. I don't check them on the weekends. So if you get stuck on a Saturday, you can ask there, and there are plenty of other people in the forums. I'm just trying to sort of, you know, not spend all day, every day on the computer. Yes, Lisa, there are other viewers, but I think maybe I've magically answered everyone's questions. Thank you, Nicole, for answering Lisa. So like I said, and the other great thing about the forums is that once those questions have been answered, everybody else can see those answers too. So, so if you're stuck, be sure to check out the forums and see if the question's already been answered. If no one has asked that question, it doesn't mean that it's not a good question. It means that nobody's asked the question. So please, if you don't see your question, ask it, because you are not the only one. There is no way. There are like 1,200 of us knitting or participating, or at least signed up for the newsletter, who are working on the Purly Pullover. And there is no way that you are the only one with a particular question. And it may be something, you know, you have a good question, and it's something that I just do and I don't think about, so I haven't talked about it yet. But there are lots of different knitters, different styles of knitting, different ways to think about knitting. So I love it when there's a question that I haven't even thought about, that something I just do, because I'm sure there's something that I have a question on that somebody else just does, that you do. And so, so I just, yeah, that's my little spiel about that. So I guess that's everything. Lisa, no stupid questions. And I don't think of you as a newbie, Lisa. I feel like I've known you a long time, a lot on Periscope, right? And I think you've done a great job. I think, so don't feel silly. And the funny thing is, for a lot of things, like I remember when I learned how to cast on, I had a tough time with it. And it wasn't, then it finally clicked. And a lot of kids, I teach them how to knit first, and then we do binding off, because that's building on the knit skill, and then we do casting on for the next thing. And I can see when they finally get it, because it's a trick. And it's, if somebody explains it to you and your brain doesn't work that way, it doesn't matter how experienced you are, whatever other techniques, this one technique you get stuck on. So don't fear. Don't feel, there are no stupid questions. They're all good, and honestly, be brave. So sharing and being brave are my things that I'm working on this year. And so that's why I'm here talking to you live. And so I want you to share and be brave along with me, which reminds me, share your projects on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm on all the places. Most places I'm at Kathleen Names. Tag me or tag your projects with the hashtag Purly Pullover, KD Sweater, and let me know if I can share them with everybody, because I love seeing what everyone's working on. And so I think that's everything. We are almost out of time. I said I'd go till noon so I can go have some lunch and get some other work done. Sorry, George is out of the corner of my eye over there. Here, no, I can't. I'm worried if I shift the computer, it will fall down. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Nicole, for saying exactly what I'm saying to Lisa and Marion. There are no stupid questions. There are good questions that just may not have been asked yet. And everyone else may be scared to ask it too. So, okay, don't fret. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. This was so much fun. I had a great time. I hope you had fun. And so this will be going live as episode 5, or up as episode 5 on YouTube now. So, mwah! Thank you for being here. Bye.